Okay, so were there any questions arising from the meditation or from anything that practiced during the week, or even from last time, or anything else before I continue?
Can I ask about the mandala?
Yes, David, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what exactly you are supposed to be offering when you offer the mandala. I know what the words are,
yeah,
but what are you actually offering? And what does it mean by I offer without any sense of loss? You know, the objects that give rise to my attachment, hatred, and confusion.
okay.
What does that mean exactly? And what does Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirayati mean? Sorry about all the questions.
I'm not actually sure about what the Sanskrit means, to be honest. But the basic meaning, well, I mean, I think it's very good it's a very good question, David, because we do this, you know, this is just a traditional thing that we do. We make these offerings, we offer the water bowls and all kinds of offerings. It's a very, very important practice, obviously, in the tradition. And yet, I'm not sure that there's very much explanation usually given of why exactly do we make offerings. So it's an interesting question. I mean, it's not only in Tibetan Buddhism, it's all forms of Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, almost all religions. It's a common practice, isn't it? You know, that in a temple or whatever, or a church, you know, there's offerings. The harvest festival, everybody brings, you know, food to offer. But anyway, this, you know, incense is offered, light is offered, etc. So it seems to be almost universal in all religions, as you know, or not, maybe not all, but most. So it's interesting to think about why did we do this? I mean, when you make, for instance, the water bowl offerings, those actually that is a Tibetan practice. It wasn't done in India because in India, they would offer 7 different substances. In Tibet, they weren't always easy to obtain. So I think it was actually Atisha, who we spoke about last time, from whom this teaching that we're studying comes from, Lama Atisha. And I think it was him that introduced the practice of the water bowl offering, saying, well, it's all right to just offer a bowl of water and imagine that it's flowers or it's incense or it's, you know, that's what these 7 bowls represent. They represent the 7 things that you would offer in, you know, in ancient India if an honored guest came to your home, right? So you would offer them water for drinking, water for washing, you'd offer flowers, incense, light, perfume, food, and music. So all of these things is part of their hospitality etiquette, that they would do that. But especially, of course, if it was a holy person, you know, a teacher, he'd come on a dusty road, it'd be hot, and they want to have a wash and they want to have something to drink and so on. So as to make that guest feel comfortable. So when we meditate in this tradition, and we visualize the Buddha as we've just done, the way this is thought of is that it's not just that you have a painting, like a, you know, a piece of cloth with some paint on it, or a, you know, photograph or whatever of a statue, for instance. We should have the mental attitude that that image is the actual Buddha or the actual teacher, the Guru. Okay, and these are viewed as interchangeable. You know, after all, who is the Buddha? The Buddha is our teacher. You know, the reason why we kind of have an image of the Buddha on the shrine is because he was the original teacher of the, you know, so the two are seen as interchangeable, you know, indistinguishable, the guru and the teacher. So you imagine that the Buddha or the teacher is actually there. Well, what would you do? You would offer them that kind of hospitality. So these offerings can become very elaborate. If you do the offering to the guru, the Lama Chöpa offering practice, all kinds of offerings, both actual, physical ones and imagined, visualized offerings. It's everything you can think of is offered, but everything that is pure and special. That's how we would honor, how we would kind of show respect and appreciation and honor to the spiritual teacher, right? So when we offer the mandala, what we visualize, it's in the long mandala offering, it's explained in much more detail. So this verse here is a shortened version. So this long mandala offering where many more details are given, and it's what it basically is. Usually when we talk about a mandala, it means the environment in which an enlightened being lives. Okay, so each Buddha has their own mandala. Chenrezig has a mandala, Tara has a mandala, and so on. But here, it's the mandala of this world. Okay, so it's this world, but it's imagined and visualized in a purified form. So it's this world in the form of a pure land, what's called a pure land, where there is complete absence of suffering or anything impure or, anything that is defective or problematic. It's just when we imagine this world as a paradise, and it's described in the form of a golden disc, right? Again, it's like a golden circular disc with the land is in the middle, and there's 4 continents in the north, south, east, and west, and 8 subcontinents, like the islands around about. And in the center is the holy mountain, the Mount Meru, which has 4 sides of different colors. And then there are all these kind of beautiful objects, everything, all kinds of precious jewels, and it's talking about uncultivated harvests and beautiful animals and plants and jewels and treasures and everything that is beautiful. That's what we're offering. So the idea is just to make the most magnificent, pure and splendid offering to the teacher, because showing that kind of what's the best word? You're acknowledging, kind of making a statement about how highly you value the teacher. And that is not for the teacher's benefit, it's for your own benefit, because we receive spiritual benefit from having that kind of very high regard and respect for the spiritual teacher, the one who is, giving us this gift of the Dharma, which has the potential to free us from all suffering and bring us the highest happiness. And on top of that, also to gain the ability to give that to others. There's nothing more precious that we could possibly receive from anyone. And so therefore, to show some recognition of that by making an offering to the teacher is very beneficial to oneself. It creates a very positive state of mind. So that's my understanding. As I say, it's not often spoken about. It's kind of taken for granted. Well, of course you would offer, but it is a question I've often asked myself. Why exactly am I doing this? Does it really make sense? Because you tend to think, oh, well, he's not really there, so he's not receiving any. I'm offering something, but nothing's being received. But and I will speak about this probably quite a bit as we go through. when we visualize the Buddha or the Guru in front of us, our tendency is to think, oh, well, that's just our imagination. It's not really there. But this is misleading. And so it is taught very seriously that we should generate the conviction when we visualize the Buddha is actually there in front of us. And it is said that the Buddha actually promised this. You know, he said, when anyone thinks of me with faith, I am in that place. So we'll explore that because, you know, it's quite hard at first to understand what that means. You know, is the Buddha saying that seriously? Or is it just some kind of, you know, nice idea? But I think it's more than that. So I will talk about that in more depth, maybe later on. But I hope that's enough for now about that question. I'm sorry,
Yes,
I don't have the translation of the Sanskrit. I don't know. But you did ask just about offering the objects of our attachment. And that's interesting because, yes, normally it's thought of, we offer things that we feel are very special and pleasant, you know. So in other words, rather than grasping to having those things ourselves, if we have that kind of feeling towards something and we then offer it to someone else, that's a, you know, very powerful practice of generosity. So if we're, you know, offering something that we're strongly attached to someone else, helps to reduce our attachment and transform it into a positive spiritual, you know, quality of generosity. Okay. So thank you for that question. And I hope that kind of, you know, sheds a bit of light on really what I'm going to talk about this evening, which is mainly the attitude to the spiritual teacher. But before I go into that, has anyone else got a question? Or shall I?
Yeah, I do have a question. I don't know.
Please.
It's just about the visualization. I find it quite powerful for sort of a few seconds at a time, and then the rest of the time I struggle to do it. So I was just wondering if there's any techniques to sort of work with that, or if it's just a matter of just keep practicing more regularly and it will improve.
Yeah, no, very good question, Isabel. And many people find it very difficult. So it sounds like, I mean, if you're getting anything at all, that's great. First thing, you know, because some people struggle for years and really get hardly anything. And my first response would be, if it comes and goes, that's fine. Don't expect to be able to maintain that visualization strongly and clearly and continuously for a longish period. That's very unlikely. You know, that's a very high level of practice indeed. So it's great if you do get moments when it's quite vivid. That's really excellent. And the other thing to say about that is, you know, I don't know enough about the actual language, the Sanskrit or Tibetan. When we use this word visualize in English, what the meaning of the original term actually is. But it doesn't, my understanding is it doesn't primarily refer to having that kind of a vivid visual sensation, you know. That's good. But really, it's a sense of the presence of the object, you know. So if we're visualizing the Buddha, well, then some kind of visual details might come and go, or we might get nothing at all. It might just be like, you know, fog, which is how it is with me a lot of the time. But that actually doesn't really matter. What really matters is having the sense of the presence of the Guru or the Buddha in front of you. So the visual image is very helpful for that. And it is very, you know, it's excellent if you have that. But even if you don't have anything visual coming through, if you can try and tune into, you know, because when we do the practice, especially when we do something like taking refuge, for instance, or taking, when we recite the bodhicitta, lines, we can consider that we're taking the Bodhisattva vow. Okay. So this isn't just something that I'm doing, you know, it's an interaction between me and the Buddha, or me and the Guru, isn't it? You know, I'm saying I take refuge in you. Or I'm saying, you know, I promise to, you know, to follow the Bodhisattva path. Then we're saying that to the Guru, to the Buddha. So I think you can understand, if we're making a statement like that, we are making it to him or her, because your Guru might be female, of course. You know, so it's in that sense that you feel you are in a conversation with them. You know, you feel that he or she is there. That's the main thing. Yeah. So the visual image is wonderful. If you get that at all, you're doing pretty good, in my opinion. A lot of people struggle with it. I mean, people vary a lot. Some people are very naturally visual, and others aren't. It sounds like you at least have some of that, but very few people would have it like continuously for minutes at a time. That'd be very exceptional. Okay, so just keep practicing, and it will get stronger. It will get better as well. Yeah.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, so I'll continue. So partly for David and Mel's benefit, but partly just to kind of recap and put it into context. This text is, I chose it because it actually combines two systems of meditation, the Lamrim, the graduated path to enlightenment, and the Lojong, the mind training tradition. They're very closely related, and they both come from this great teacher, Lama Atisha, in the 11th century, who came to Tibet from India. There's a very moving story about how he came to be invited to Tibet, like one of the kings of Tibet, because there was, I think there were different, at that time, different regions, but the king of one of the parts of Tibet, it involved him actually sacrificing his life so that Atisha could come and teach. So that explains, you know, how precious they thought the Dharma teachings were and how special they thought that Atisha was. And this was mainly because of his great, very pure morality, and his very pure compassion, motivation of bodhicitta. Okay, that's why he was regarded as this most special and precious teacher, and his teachings became extremely important in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, right up to the present day. You know, Lama Tsongkhapa emphasized the importance of Atisha's teachings, and especially, you know, this pure ethics and pure compassion. And then all of the Dalai Lamas followed in the same tradition, so they all relate to the teachings of Atisha as the great sort of source of this. You know, I mean, Tibetan Buddhism is held in very high regard in the world these days. And people might think it's because of this very special tantric, you know, practices, but I don't think it is. I think the reason why it's so highly regarded is for this very fact that the emphasis on compassion, on pure ethics, on humility, on authentic, you know, concern for others. These are the reasons why Tibetan Buddhism has spread around the world, and why it's, you know, so highly respected. So that comes to a great extent from Atisha. I'm not saying it wasn't the case with other teachers, but especially Atisha and those who followed from him, this lineage that he passed down from, to his disciples and their disciples and so on, where it eventually came to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then from Lama Tsongkhapa via another teacher, it came down to the first Dalai Lama, so this text that we're studying. So the text is classified as a Lojong text, mind training text, but it also incorporates a great deal of the Lam Rim, coming from Atisha also, but also through the Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim. I think especially that he wrote several different Lam Rims, so the one called the middle length Lam Rim. Quite a lot of that is incorporated into this text. I thought it would be very good to, because we study both of these systems, but here they're combined into one in a way that I think is very skillful. And one reason why I think this Lojong, this mind training approach is very beneficial is because, there are many wonderful methods of meditation, systems of meditation that have come through the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but the particular quality that this one has, which some of the others don't have, is that, and it's very strongly emphasized, we can practice it in any situation. So even if we have a busy, life, family, work, and so on, that's no obstacle to this practice. And it is, if we want to practice some of the other, that we might consider more deeper or more advanced practices, they're not actually, but they, in a way they are. But these, for example, the tantric practices and the wisdom teachings, the philosophical teachings, if we want to practice those, they will have much less benefit unless they're on the strong foundation of, we can say really the three principles of the path. So this is one of Lama Tsongkhapa's texts, which is a very concise form of the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment. And so he basically distills it down to these three spiritual qualities that we need to develop. The first one being renunciation, giving up compulsive attachment and aversion in order to be able to practice a spiritual path in a pure way. Then compassion or bodhicitta, having a pure motivation to want to help others, to help them to become free from suffering. And then the wisdom, the understanding of the true nature of reality and the nature of the mind and the self and so on, that we need to if we want to free others from suffering, we have to know the method to free ourselves from suffering. And this is through the practice of the training in wisdom. So whatever, further study we want to do, or different tantra practices or anything like that, we need this strong foundation of those three. And in the Lojong, in the mind training tradition, it's really stripped down to the bare essentials, if you like. It's a very concentrated, pure training in those three. Okay. So it is one of the best forms of practice if we want our practice to be very pure. And this is emphasized as extremely important, much more important than practicing the very advanced and complicated, tantra or philosophical teachings or whatever. If our practice of these three, renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom of emptiness, or if those three are practiced purely, we don't need to worry about anything else, actually. I mean, if we want to practice Tantra, we can, and it will enhance our practice. But if we don't feel motivated to do that, well, there's no need. Or even those philosophical teachings that we sometimes think, oh, it's very important, I need to study, Perfection of Wisdom Sutras or Abhisamayalankara, whatever, all these profound texts. But if we're doing this, we don't actually need to do that. We needn't feel any kind of, where there's any shortcoming in our practice, as long as we're doing these fundamental, essential practices. So the people who taught this originally, the disciples of Lama Atisha, who was the, who wrote the, who introduced the teachings, this kind of system comes from him. He was the original teacher. And the people who followed him, they were called these Kadampa Geshis. Okay, so Geshi meaning a spiritual friend. And they were renowned for their spiritual purity, their pure ethics, their pure compassion, their complete humility, complete lack of any kind of pride or egoistic, view. Okay, so these are the examples we should look to. And if we look at our own teachers, especially Lama Zopa Rinpoche and especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, they continually praise these teachings, and Lama Atisha and the the Kadampa teachers as the example to follow. Okay, so it helps us to develop that really strong foundation of pure practice. And it also has this great advantage that we don't need to feel or haven't got enough time, because we can practice it in our daily life. At any moment, we can be practicing this. And it's just distilled down to a few very key points. But in this particular text, it's a little bit more elaborate, because the first Dalai Lama has brought in, some different rituals and meditations and aspects of the Lamrim teaching as well. So I thought that would be good to bring that in at this stage. Okay, so last week I talked about the first chapter in the book, the preamble, which is really what I've just been talking about, how these teachings came from Atisha and so on, and how they're like this distilled essence of the Dharma, if you like, and that the main topic is bodhicitta, okay, the mind of enlightenment, the compassionate wish to free all beings from suffering. So then, with that as the foundation, he's giving a commentary on a text called the 7-point mind training. So this is a method to develop the mind of enlightenment, the mind of bodhicitta. Okay. And so this root text, that is, was written by a teacher called Geshe Chekawa, who was, I don't know, 3 or 4 generations after Atisha. Don't remember exactly. It was Geshe Langri Tangpa wrote the 8 verses of training the mind, and then his disciple Geshe Sharawa taught to Geshe Chekawa, who then wrote this text. And it's very, very short, concise, and it's actually it's really not possible to understand it without a commentary. So Geshe Chekawa himself wrote a commentary on the text, but then there are a number of subsequent ones. So this one by the first Dalai Lama is one, and then also the other book that I recommended, called Advice from a Spiritual Friend, contains a commentary on the 7-point mind training by Geshe Rabten. so who lived in the last century. I think he died in about 2000 or something like that, maybe before actually. Yeah, can't remember when Geshe Rabten died, maybe about 1990. Anyway, he was a great Lama, very learned, and he wrote a rather very beautiful commentary. So if you can't get hold of this book, that other book is also very, very useful. So I'm going on now to into the main body of the text, and this is point 1 of the 7 points, called the preliminary practices. Okay, so I think it's just one line actually in the root text. It just says first train in the preliminary practices. So you can see how concise the root text is. Yeah, that's all it says. And then there's a whole chapter of commentary on that one line. Obviously, you need the commentary because as you wouldn't know what those preliminary practices were, would you? So it's quite interesting the way that the first Dalai Lama divides them up, because this isn't the way that they're usually explained, I don't think. But he says there's 2 parts, there's preliminary practices divided into 2. The first part is, he says, the meditation on Guru Yoga. Sometimes we say Guru devotion. Anyway, I'll explain what that is. And he says, which is a method for establishing blessings on the mind stream. So that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. And then number 2, the methods for preparing oneself and making oneself into a vessel capable of undergoing the actual training. Right. So this second part of the preliminary practices, which we'll begin to talk about next week, is laying the foundation upon which we can practice, or we can develop, this mind of bodhicitta, which is the main purpose of the whole teaching, is for us to develop bodhicitta. Okay. So when you have developed bodhicitta in the full sense, then you become a bodhisattva, right? So if you ever wondered what that word means, that's what it means. It means someone whose motivation in everything that they do is to free all beings from suffering. Okay. Essentially, that's what bodhicitta means. So to have that to that level where it arises spontaneously, whatever we're doing, I mean, yes, we can have now, I'd love to, save all sentient beings from suffering. May even, we take the bodhisattva vow, or whatever. We may be very serious in our intention. I want to become a Buddha to help all living beings. But it doesn't, for most of us, arise spontaneously all the time in every situation. And that's what a bodhisattva is. And so to be able to develop this very special spiritual quality, if you like, we need a strong foundation. And that's the purpose of these preliminary practices, the second part. And those are what is usually, or very often, that's what's referred to as the preliminary practices. So it's interesting that the first Dalai Lama includes the Guru devotion or the Guru Yoga as a preliminary practice in a separate category. But it is also in the Lam Rim, in the stages of the path system of Lama Tsongkhapa, it's also actually quite similar. So the way that he explains it is the Guru Yoga is the foundation. It's said to be the root of the path. It's said that, often in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that all of, developing any of the spiritual realizations whether it is bodhicitta or the wisdom of emptiness or the tantric realizations or whatever, when we talk about a realization, we mean where this Lojong mind training, we could also translate it as transforming the mind. Okay, so that means something different from just having a new idea, doesn't it? We might, our belief of something might change. We might have believed one thing one day and then we find out some new information and we believe something different, but our mind hasn't really been transformed when that happens. Okay, but sometimes something happens internally where our mind is transformed. We suddenly, our whole attitude to life changes, if you like. The whole way we think about things and the way we experience our life can change quite profoundly. And that's what we mean by a realization. So for some people, one of the most important realizations is the realization of death awareness, for example. Well, now we all know we're going to die, I think anybody's in any doubt about that. But we live our lives as if that wasn't the case, right? We don't really think about our death and what that means for the fact that I may only be on this planet, in this body, for a few more years, and then this life will end. What does that imply for how I might want to think about my life and how I might want to live my life? But if you get a terminal diagnosis, you go to the doctors and they say, you've got a pain in your chest or whatever, you go to the doctor and say, hey, there's a problem. And he says, I'm afraid you've got 6 months to live. It changes your whole life, doesn't it? And I think, we all kind of familiar perhaps with examples of that, and not necessarily, in a terrible way. I mean, obviously it's a shock to hear that information, and it may cause a tremendous amount of upset, but very often what happens to people is that they suddenly start to live their life in a much more positive way. And actually, life becomes richer and more meaningful because of the realization that we only have a certain amount of time left to live it. So we don't postpone any longer actually living our life the way we really want to live it. So this idea of a realization is very important, and so what is saying here is that, he says, this meditation of Guru Yoga is a method for establishing blessings on the mind stream. Okay, so that means kind of it makes the mind, prepares the mind, or puts the mind into a state to be able to experience the realizations of the path. Okay. So it's an interesting idea. That this connection with the guru, with the spiritual teacher, is extremely important in terms of gaining the experience of the realization, of transforming the mind on a deep level, so that our mind becomes, deeply compassionate, for example, or, that we stop experiencing anger. This would be the realization of patience. So this is very strongly emphasized, that the connection to this guru, the spiritual teacher, is very fundamental. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes anyway. So the first part, so he was talking about the meditation of Guru Yoga, and he begins by talking about Shakyamuni Buddha, who he was, what he did, and the teachings. which are traditionally divided into two. Here it's referred to as the Hinayana, or the lesser vehicle, or smaller vehicle, and the Mahayana, or the great vehicle. His Holiness Dalai Lama says he doesn't like those terms because from the point of view, the traditional Tibetan point of view, you know, they would probably say that, or they would say that the Theravada tradition, which is practiced in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Cambodia, and other countries, you know, that this is a Hinayana tradition, and it has a bit of an uncomfortable ring to it when we say, well, they're the lesser vehicle practitioners, you know. It sounds a bit like, you know, discrimination, like, you know, looking down upon those practitioners. And the Dalai Lama says it would be better to talk about the, he says, Shravakayana, which is Sanskrit, which would mean the individual. Oh, no, wait a minute. Maybe not Shravakayana. Let me. What is it? Yeah. I think Pratimokshayana, maybe. Anyway, individual. Patimoksha means individual liberation. So he said this is good to call it the individual vehicle rather than the lesser vehicle, because the teachings there emphasize the individual's path to become free from suffering. And the what's usually called Mahayana, he says we should call it the universal vehicle, because in this tradition that we belong to, our concern is with universal suffering, with the suffering of all beings, right? So taking away this sense of we're better than them. Right. So yeah, so the Buddha taught, you know, these two aspects, if you like, the way to become free from suffering oneself, and really you can say the way to develop a concern for the suffering of all beings to the highest degree. So he says, the founder of our spiritual legacy, the mighty Buddha Shakyamuni, it's the name that is, you know, given to the historical Buddha in this tradition, first gave birth to the altruistic aspiration to achieve highest enlightenment in order to be of maximum benefit to all living beings. That's quite a mouthful. And that's bodhicitta, okay? That's a good definition of bodhicitta. So it's an altruistic aspiration. In other words, rather than being concerned just with my own well-being, my primary concern is with the welfare of others, with the benefit, with the happiness of others. So out of that concern for others, I have the aspiration to achieve the highest enlightenment. So in other words, you know, there's no valid reason to want complete enlightenment, what we call Buddhahood, this state of where all faults and limitations of the mind have been eliminated and all positive qualities have been developed to the highest possible degree. There's no real reason, valid reason for me to want that, except because only through that can I be of the greatest benefit to others, right? Otherwise, you know, why do I want that? Is kind of some kind of self-aggrandizement. You know, I want to be this sort of extraordinary, special, amazing being, you know. Why? To gratify my ego. But it is by definition the state of having no ego. So we can't want it for that kind of reason. We cannot want Buddhahood for a selfish reason. We can only want it out of, you know, we can only have an authentic desire to become a Buddha based on, if I don't achieve Buddhahood, then I'm very limited in what I can give to others and how I can help others. So that he generated this very special mind, which we call bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment. Then it says, for 3 uncountable aeons, he built up the stores of positive energy and wisdom. This is the way that it's traditionally taught, that the Buddha, for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, you know, with this selfless motivation, wanting to free all beings from suffering, underwent all kinds of hardship and you know, trained for many, many lifetimes. And finally, it says at the diamond seat, which is in Bodh Gaya, you know, he achieved the complete perfection of omniscient Buddhahood. Okay. And for the benefit of those to be trained, he taught the 84,000 aspects of the Dharma. Well, he certainly taught for 45 years. He gave many, many, many teachings to many, many, you know, people. And those teachings have flourished and benefited literally millions upon millions of people down, you know, through history. It's quite something to think about, you know, because it's probably getting into now the billions, maybe, of people who have benefited from those teachings. So really, it was just one man who, because of complete, absolute determination and dedication to want to help others, practiced with such intensity and depth that he broke through to this realization. And therefore, the teachings that he gave were so powerful, so effective, so you know, so well grounded, so well structured, if you like, you know, that they've endured for 2,500 years, and they're still, you know, coming down to us in their purity, being practiced purely, and people are gaining the same realizations of enlightenment. So this is really something extraordinary when we think about it, you know, how much benefit one person has been able to bring to millions upon millions upon millions through thousands of years. So when we talk about being able to benefit all sentient beings, we have an example to think about, you know. Because the Buddha he had the same, you know, the same kind of physical and mental equipment that we have. And he emphasized very strongly, you know, any of us have the same potential, right? It is available, it is possible. Maybe it will take more than one lifetime. I mean, as long as we can accept that we do have more than one lifetime, then perhaps that shouldn't worry us, you know, okay? So maybe this life, maybe next life, maybe the one after that. But this isn't something that is limited to some kind of special being that I can never become. You know, it's not that we place the Buddha on this kind of, you know, very, very high pedestal as something unreachable. But the Buddha is very, very strongly emphasizes, essentially, I'm no different from you. You have the same potential. You can do this as well. So he gave all of these teachings, and as it says, they can all be subsumed under 2 categories. The Hinayana, or we're going to say now the individual vehicle, our own smaller vehicle, and the Mahayana, or the universal vehicle, we'll say. So in the first of these, he revealed the means of achieving nirvana, or liberation from cyclic existence, which is accomplished through transcending the belief in a truly existent self. So here it's saying the cause of all our suffering is our mistaken view of self. We have this idea of me that our whole life centers around, and it doesn't coincide with reality. And it is because of that very, you know, we've kind of fixated on this sense of self that we have that drives all of our experiences. We think especially about emotional suffering. which is, if anything, worse than physical suffering. We certainly experience more of it in this, you know, in our kind of lives as Westerners in the 21st century. We experience relatively little physical suffering, comparatively speaking, but we probably all experience quite a bit of emotional suffering. And we probably also can recognize that it can be much worse. And why do we experience emotional suffering? If you think about it, without the sense of self, that would be impossible, wouldn't it? All of our emotions relate to me. It's like, I'm feeling this, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm, you know, there's something about what this I isn't getting what it wants. But that I that isn't getting what it wants is actually, the Dharma teachings tell us, is actually an illusory concept. There is no such I that we think we are. And many people, and it's interesting now, actually, I think it's happening more and more people are certainly having this experience of the I disappearing. I don't know if you're kind of familiar with this fact, but there's a kind of, you know, a lot of people talk about non-duality. And there are many teachers kind of teaching this non-duality. And it seems to be typically people who may have been living a very ordinary, average life and suddenly woke up one morning and their ego was gone. And then what's, you know, this is, everything's different, you know, like, hello, what's happening here? I'm just reading a book at the moment, actually, by a woman. It's called When Fear Falls Away. And it was written by a woman who suffered very badly from fear. You know, she had to go and have you know, scan for breast cancer, and then she had to have a biopsy, and this happened 3 times, you know, in successive years, that they said, oh, you need a biopsy. And every time she was in absolute terrible fear that she would get cancer. And then for years afterwards, she had to go every year, you know, to get this sort of checkup, and it always came back fine, no problem, you know. but every time she was going through horrendous suffering of anxiety and fear, thinking this time it's going to be positive and I'm going to die. And then one night, I think, when it was in this terrible state of sweating because she was going to have to go for her mammogram, she, I wonder what it would be like if I went and didn't have this fear. And she thought, maybe that is possible. And she went, and there was no fear. It was completely absent, and it never came back. And she discovered she wasn't afraid of anything. And her whole life became completely and utterly different. So we can see, you know, that fear is the ego, isn't it? That's creating that. The ego just talking to itself and creating suffering. And that's what it does. And it's a recent thing, you know, the more and more people seem to be having these experiences, whether it's kind of going viral, I'm not sure. But anyway, this is really what the Buddha was talking about, you know, that our ego, it's our ego that causes us suffering. We'll talk a lot about the ego. And that is really one of the main topics in this mind training teaching, you know. What is the ego and what is it doing to us, and how can we be free of it, because we're imprisoned by the ego. Yeah. So, yeah, thus here it says the emphasis was on the methods of eliminating the I-holding ignorance. Right. So that's the phrase he's using here. It's the usual translation of the Sanskrit or Tibetan original term is self-grasping, which means having this fixed idea of a self that exists in a very kind of concrete way from its own side. And we'll talk about that quite a lot later on. That's a major topic. So that's usually called self-grasping. And then there's the other aspect of the ego, which is the self-cherishing attitude, which is, because I have this sense of me, then I kind of privilege me over everybody else. And I pursue what this I wants, whilst disregarding the interest of others, if you like. That's what we call self-cherishing. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't cherish ourselves, actually. That's just the way it's been translated. It's and quite a few people are saying, these days, let's change the translation, maybe call it something like the self-centeredness or something like that. But these are, in the mind training teaching, everything centers on these two mental factors, self-grasping and self-cherishing. So self-grasping is a view, okay, and self-cherishing is kind of like a motivation. It's like the opposite of compassion, if you like. Compassion is the motivation, wanting to free others from suffering, wanting to benefit others, whereas self-cherishing is just wanting to look after number one, if you like. So these are two aspects of, we can say they're two aspects of the ego. So in the second category of teachings, the Mahayana, the Buddha mainly emphasized the methods for eliminating the self-cherishing attitude and replacing it with universal love and compassion. So this is the basis for, as I said, the goal here was to induce realization of the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood as a means of benefiting all sentient beings. Okay. So because the basic motivation is wanting to free others from suffering and bring them perfect happiness, then first of all, it's the emphasis is on getting rid of the self-cherishing attitude, this motivation. So although the method finally, with that motivation, then we also have to again meditate on the wisdom of emptiness to destroy the self-grasping. But first we need the opposite of self-cherishing. We need compassion as our motivation. And with that motivation, then ultimately we attain this state of complete perfection, complete and perfect Buddhahood. Okay. So this is all by way of preamble. And now we come to the main point here. It says to practice either of these vehicles, Hinayana or Mahayana, or the individual or the universal vehicle, successfully, it is important to rely upon a qualified teacher. In particular, to accomplish the Mahayana methods, it is important to train under a master accomplished in the Mahayana path. Yeah. So here's just, we're coming into the practice of Guru devotion, Guru Yoga, and introducing that by saying, in order to gain the realizations that we want to gain, which is ultimately complete enlightenment, then we need a teacher. And that's something which, people debate about. Well, do we? Or can we just find it out from books? And it is sometimes different people say different things, but sometimes people say, if you're following this individual liberation path, if you like, well, Bodhisattva, that's a bit too much for me. I'm just, going to seek my own liberation from suffering. It's perfectly all right. So sometimes it's said it's not absolutely necessary to have a guru or a teacher to do that. Maybe you can, just by studying the sutras and practicing, studying from books and practicing on your own, maybe you still could do that. Although it would probably be, it would save you a lot of time and effort if you do have a teacher. But however, that's not how it is with this Mahayana path. To gain the realization of complete enlightenment, it is very, very emphatically said, we need to have a qualified, we need to have a qualified guru, a teacher. So this is said in the Tibetan tradition, but it's also very clear in the Zen tradition, isn't it? We know, although people do, read books on Zen and practice Zen, but the way that it's taught in China and Japan, it's not taught so much in China anymore, but and Korea, the relationship with the teacher is absolutely fundamental. That's how the realizations come, is through the relationship with the teacher. And it's the same in the Tantra, in the Tibetan or the Himalayan Buddhist tradition. There's no question that to gain the realizations of Tantra, you absolutely need to have, in fact, even to practice Tantra at all, you need to have a guru, no question. And in terms of the Mahayana, yes, you can begin to practice by yourself, but obviously to get all the way, to gain the high realizations, we can't do it without a guru, and there are very deep reasons for that. Okay. I mean, interestingly, some of these people that I was talking about, where they have this spontaneous experience. The most well-known one, of course, is Eckhart Toller, who I think had a very deep enlightenment experience, and he wasn't doing any spiritual practice at all. So I might seem to be contradicting myself by acknowledging that. And there would be, there would be ways to answer that. But it's actually, if we think about it, it's, doesn't necessarily contradict. Because although it happened to him, he wasn't seeking that at all. It just, I think I've painted myself into a corner here because I'm having to explain my way out of. I think, all of these things we need to interpret a bit carefully. Things can happen, unusual things can happen. Sometimes, people have gained realizations through an experience that they've had that's had to do with a mountain or an animal or a tree, these things. And then in terms of this traditional way of speaking, we say, well, actually that tree or that mountain was actually a manifestation of the Buddha. That was a guru, because the guru is seen as a manifestation of the Buddha. So there are these exceptional sort of things that can happen. Again, unusual things, but it doesn't really negate the principle that in order to transcend my own ego, I need to relate to something that has the power to overcome that ego. And usually that's a person. Usually that is someone who themselves has already done that. Okay. In my personal view, it's not that it can't happen any other way, but we can't make it happen any other way. But what we can do is we can recognize there are gurus, so we can't, I can't sort of set out to make the thing that happened to Eckhart Tolle happen to me. What happened to him was similarly to that other woman, actually, that he was going through for years, he was going through dreadful suffering because his mind was just kind of wouldn't let go of it. He was kind of had these obsessional thoughts all the time, and he was going through dreadful suffering. And then suddenly it kind of, reached breaking point, and then it suddenly disappeared and evaporated in a moment. Very similar experience. And this is also often, in the Zen traditions, quite similar, but they have a process that induces that state where your mind just kind of, your obsessional, self-grasping mind, conceptual mind, just kind of gives up and lets go and stops getting in your way, because actually the enlightenment experience is just your natural mind not being confused by this conceptual grasping that we call the ego. Anyway, this is me off on my own kind of new age rant, I think, rather than the traditional teachings. Just trying to explain how I see enlightenment, because it's a very interesting question. And sometimes the way that it's described in the teachings can seem rather abstract. I want to try and bring it to life, because it's a real experience, that is not actually necessarily out of our reach. I don't know, one of us here on this Zoom call may become enlightened before very long. We don't know. It's quite possible. It's a real thing, is what I'm saying.
I've got it in my diary.
Oh, what's that?
It's in my diary, when I'm becoming enlightened.
Oh, good. I'm glad to know that, David. Yes, excellent. Great. Okay, very good. Yeah. So, just talking a bit about the importance of the guru, and I want to say, although I'm talking about there may be some kind of special exceptions, but basically, if we want to become enlightened, it would be a big mistake to think, well, I'm going to be the first one who did it without a guru. It is the way to do it. So I realize I'm probably going to continue talking about this topic in the next class as well. It is very, very important, as we're already perhaps beginning to see. So here, the first Dalai Lama says, here it is said that the correct way to train under a spiritual master, a guru, is to transcend the mindset that sees the teacher as ordinary, and instead to learn to see him as an actual Buddha. Okay. So when we talk about guru devotion or guru yoga, that's the main thing that is meant. Okay. So we might have an experience where we go to hear a teacher and we think, this is not an ordinary person. This is someone, who is enlightened. You might have that experience. And that's great. That's the best. Especially if that experience is a lasting one, because we can get kind of starry-eyed sometimes. We can be very impressed by someone. They have a charismatic manner, maybe very eloquent, maybe very magnetic personality or whatever. All of that can be true. They're not necessarily an enlightened being. But we do have some ability to discriminate, between what's authentic spiritual realization and what is just some kind of maybe showmanship or whatever, or more superficial qualities. If we identify, the real deep spiritual, what you might call spiritual presence, then that's very, very fortunate, and that then it maybe, at least initially, isn't so difficult to see that teacher as an enlightened being, as a Buddha. Here is saying a bit more than that, actually. Is saying, well, if you find somebody that can teach you this Mahayana path, then you should regard them as a Buddha. Right? So ideally, of course, we want to find a guru who is actually, we know, they are enlightened. But even if we find one who doesn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary, but they're able to lead us on this path, and we have confidence that they have the authentic spiritual qualities that enable them to do that, then what the text is saying is we should train to see that person as a Buddha. This is a very deep topic. It's a very important topic. And it's quite a controversial one as well. This idea of guru devotion doesn't go down well with a lot of people these days. And that's partly because in recent years, we know there have been a few examples of what are known as dodgy gurus. People who have established a very great reputation, high reputation as a spiritual teacher, guru, and then they've been convicted of some kind of misconduct, and everybody becomes very disillusioned, and it can be a great deal of suffering can be caused. So we have to be very, very careful, who we take as a guru. But also here, what it's saying is, well, when you have decided to take somebody as a guru, then whatever happens, you don't lose that pure view of that person. So not to deny what happens, but in the practice of guru devotion, the way that I think about it is we're choosing to look at the enlightened aspect of that person. Right? So the way I look at it, we all have an enlightened aspect, but in some people it's more visible and more prominent than others. And that's what we're interested in. And it's, because of that enlightened aspect of the person is why we give them respect, and why we want to, be in their presence, and why we want to receive their teachings. Because the teachings, it's not about the words, it's about the spirituality that is underneath the words. And that's something, of course, it depends on our own wisdom and our own stage of development to be able to tell the real gold from the fool's gold, if you like, isn't it? So we can't abdicate responsibility for making our own judgment. We have to make that judgment very carefully and not follow somebody without having a real kind of strong conviction that comes from a place of, we all have some wisdom, right? We need to use our wisdom to say, well, this person may be very famous and exciting and interesting, but this person here seems to have more genuine humility and compassion. So I'd rather follow this person who may not be so dramatic or fascinating, but, maybe has the authentic qualities that we're looking for. So then by repeatedly directing our attention to that aspect of who they are, their compassion, their kindness, their wisdom, even if they maybe have some, some faults, we don't need to kind of give up on them and think, oh, they were no good after all because they did something wrong. That can happen. not saying it will happen, not being cynical at all. But it does sometimes happen that someone who is in many ways is a really very genuine spiritual being can slip up. And then it can be very tragic because people completely lose faith. They maybe even lose faith in the whole spiritual path. They get very upset. It's not beneficial. We don't need to do that. You can say, well, that's very sad. This person made a mistake. But nevertheless, they still have spiritual qualities that I want to learn from. They can still be my teacher. Anyway, I don't want to kind of go too far in that direction. Lead you to expect that that's going to happen. It may not happen. And just one more thing to say about it as well, which is you may not at this point have identified someone that you feel able to see in that way, because when it is seen as a very special, very sort of significant step when we, from our own side, take someone as a guru, and it comes from you. They don't have to agree, they don't have to know who you are. So for myself, we talk about gurus and root gurus. So normally you might have many gurus, but you would normally have one root guru, but you can have more than one. And I feel, for me, I have two. And one is Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who I have met. But I didn't go through this ritual of saying, I want you to be my guru, and do you agree? You don't have to do that. But he knows that I'm his student, and he knows that I regard him as my guru. But the other one is only the Dalai Lama, and although I have actually had the privilege of saying hello to him, that's as far as I've got. Shook his hand on one occasion, so he doesn't know who I am. But that doesn't stop him from being my guru. That's from my side. So from my side, I regard them both to the as far as I'm able to do so, I try to consistently regard them as enlightened beings. It's not too difficult in those cases, actually. Lama Zopa, I don't know how many of you know Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but he's quite an unusual guru, and some people really kind of find it very difficult to relate to and think, well, why on earth taking this person as a guru? And for other people, it's a very it's a black and white thing. I think it's a bit of a Marmite thing, Some people just find it very, very difficult to understand, and what's he, why are people following this person as a guru? And for other people, including myself, I think this is quite absolutely, no question, is a holy being, is an enlightened being. It's quite exceptional, extraordinary in many ways, especially in terms of this quality of selflessness, of devoting his whole life, every minute of his life, to, in whatever way possible, to bring the most benefit to others. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama is quite straightforward, isn't it? It's quite easy to see. I think, well, some of you may not agree, but it's very widely seen as that. So, okay, so this is really coming to the end here, and next time we're going to go through this meditation. I will scan the pages and send you the text, and you can use it if you want. But really, what I recommend is, for the time being, that we do the meditation as we did at the beginning. Okay. And what I wanted to say, just if you don't have that kind of feeling about anybody at this point, well, this teacher is very good and that teacher is very good, but there's nobody that I see as my own personal guru. The advice I would give, well, two possibles. One is, because this was the advice that was given actually when I did went to a course given by Trubten Jinpa at that time it was Geshe Thupten Jinpa. He dropped the Geshe when he ceased to be a monk, but he's the Dalai Lama's main English translator. So he was, you know, spending a lot of his time around the Dalai Lama. And he was giving a course on Introduction to Tantra. So if you're doing Tantra, you know, you have to practice with a guru. And somebody asked him, well, you know, what if you don't really feel you have a guru? And he said, well, if you're not sure, then why not take His Holiness the Dalai Lama as your personal guru? Because you're not going to go far wrong. You know, it's a safe choice. So that's one piece of advice, but you may not want to do that. But the other thing that I think, you know, can be said is, if you don't feel you have a human guru in this life, you can regard Shakyamuni Buddha as your guru. And you can have a personal relationship with Shakyamuni Buddha. So, you know, when we do the meditation at the beginning, then you can think in this way if you want. But either way, you should see there's no distinction, you know, no difference. So for me, like, when I think about someone who's the Dalai Lama, well, what's the difference between him and the Buddha? No difference. He's doing exactly what the Buddha did. You know, he's the guide for the world. That's how I see him. You know, I'm not saying everybody has to see him that way. Many people don't, but for me, I don't see any distinction between the two. So it's the same mind, just slightly different body. Of course, we don't know what the Buddha actually looked like. So a thought has occurred to me. Maybe he looked exactly the same. I'm joking there, you know. But anyway, you know, yes, it's a different physical form, different personality, if you like, but the essence of that enlightened mind is the same. So whoever you take as your guru, then that's what you are seeking, how you're seeking to regard them. That in that, you know, although the form may be different, it might be female form, as example, instead of male, but the mind, essence of the mind is the same, enlightened mind, pure compassion and perfect wisdom. One mind. So, I've been talking for a long time, right? It is my policy to have time for questions at the end, but I'm afraid I have very little time for that. But please, if you do have a question, I'll try to answer quickly, and in future I'll try to leave more time for questions. Has anybody got anything they would like to ask before we do a short closing meditation?
Just a term you've mentioned a couple of times, I'm not quite getting the meaning of them. Kadampa?
Kadampa, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know the literal meaning. I should know it, but what it refers to is the followers of Atisha. So when Atisha came to Tibet, there were basically three great teachers who came, who each founded a new tradition, if you like, a lineage. So a school of Buddhism, you could say. Okay. So before those three teachers came in the 11th century, Buddhism came to Tibet several centuries earlier, and it was kind of brought by a teacher called Padmasambhava and another one called Shantarakshita. The Indian masters came and brought the Dharma to Tibet, and then in the 11th century there was kind of a revival, and more new teachings came from India. So at that time, then there were four schools. So the older one that came from Padmasambhava and Shantarakshita and so on was called the Nyingma, the old, which means old translation school, I think. And then the new ones, there were three. And there was the Kagyu school, which was came from Marpa, who was the teacher of Milarepa. And Marpa's teacher was Naropa, a very great Indian master. And they brought a lot of the tantric teachings. Then the Sakya tradition, and I forget the name of the Indian teacher, but then it was another, different, what we call lineages of teachings, different systems of practice that had come down through the Indian masters, came to Tibet, and the Sakya school was established. And then Atisha came, so this is all around the same time. The Sakya Pandita and Marpa and Atisha established these new schools of Buddhism. So Atisha's school was called the Kadampa school, Kadampa tradition. And this one emphasized, so then in the Kagyu school, there was a lot of emphasis on Tantra. And in the Sakya school, there was a lot of emphasis on the philosophical study and debate and so on. And in Atisha school, there was very much the emphasis, the Kadampa school, the emphasis was on pure ethics and compassion, bodhicitta, and also interesting, this sort of aspect of deep humility, and so these Kadampa masters live very, very, very simple lives, and they had very humble kind of attitude of serving others, and were renowned for their compassion and their simplicity and purity of their life. So that's the Kadampa tradition. And then Lama Tsongkhapa, about 300 years later, he studied with lamas from all of those different traditions and created his own system, which brought them all together. But basically, all of the Kadampa, the people who were following the Kadampa tradition, they all kind of came into Tsongkhapa's tradition. So it became absorbed into, which was called the Gelugpa tradition. So this is a tradition of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it's a tradition that we teach at Jamyang Center leads. But it was also called the New Kadampa tradition. So you might have heard of it's NKT organization. This is not us, but because they also come from the Gelugpa originally, that's why they call themselves New Kadampa tradition, because that was the name for Lama Tsongkhapa's tradition. So what I'm saying there is that although the Kadampa tradition itself doesn't exist anymore, but the teachings were, incorporated very much into the Gelug tradition, and they're regarded as extremely important. So that's why we study these great Kadampa teachers. Yeah. But thank you for that question. It's helpful to know that although, as I say, the Kadampa tradition per se doesn't exist anymore, but we still practice the teachings that those great masters were practicing. Okay.
David, can I just ask, I'm just wondering about, so the guru, so obviously guru comes from teacher, and I suppose conventional understanding of a teacher is a person that you have a direct relationship with. You're teaching us, for example.
Yeah. Yes.
Like I'm trying just to get a kind of a concept, because what, so obviously, so say I was to choose the Dalai Lama, that's not somebody with the direct relationship. So is it like, because it feels more like he's kind of somebody that I've, observed, and I've found to have certain qualities that
right,
that I want to bring forth myself. So in a sense, it's like he's the ideal, or
yes, the example,
so an ideal that you try and use as a norm for yourself.
That's right. Yeah, the example that you're seeking to follow. So, through listening to them teach, through observing, as you say, their kind of actions and their lifestyle and how they live, and, striving to emulate that. But although you say you don't have a direct relationship with him, in a way, I mean, when we sit in a room and hear a teacher, then there's some direct relationship. These days, it's on YouTube or Zoom, isn't it? It's not that different. In actual fact, you can get much closer to the Dalai Lama on a YouTube live stream than you ever could in a hallway with 20,000 other people. So it's interesting, what is a direct relationship and what isn't? Does it stop being a direct relationship if you watch the recording instead of watching it live? These questions. So this is kind of leading into the area of where I say, well, actually, there may be more reality when we think, when you visualize and imagine and use the power of your mind to create that sense that he's there in front of you when you're doing your meditation, you can have an authentic relationship, I think. And so this is why I say, and some teachers don't say this, but I say, because I was asked this question once by somebody, can Shakyamuni Buddha be my guru? And this particular person, I had a strong intuition that was what was right for him. So I said, yeah, I think that is possible. And we see this in Christianity, don't we? People have a very strong personal relationship with Christ. Now, they haven't met him in the flesh, but that relationship can be as real and powerful as the relationship with anybody that you actually know. So I think it's the same. It doesn't have to. I feel, although I've had my conversations with the Dalai Lama limited to literally 2 or 3 words altogether, but I don't feel less close to him than I do, for example, to Lama Zopa, who I've met a few times and had conversations with, or Geshe Tashi, who was my teacher for years and years, and I had lots of talks to. Don't feel any less close, So that's interesting to think about. Yeah. So it's that sense of, there is a real live relationship. There's something that flows between you. And they don't have to be, kind of talking back to you in their physical presence for that to happen. Yeah. Something to think about. But yeah, I mean, you're right, St. John, when we read about the life stories of the great masters, the people who attained actual enlightenment, I think there, you want to get to that level. I don't know. I mean, it might not be absolutely essential, but you'd think it's probably going to be, that level of contact that you would need to get all the way. Yeah, I would concede that that's possibly true. But no doubt, that will happen as the karma unfolds, right? So let's just, I know we're on just past 8:30 now, but if we could just take a minute to, and hello there, Sanaz, welcome, nice to see you. Where are you coming in from, please? You're muted, I can't hear you.
London.
From London. Okay. Welcome to our little group.
Thank you so much. A friend of mine, maybe I should add, Rose, who's been actually been attending your classes. She introduced me. I met her at Amaravati.
Ah, okay.
So out of Travadian.
Great.
I'm happy. Thank you for allowing me to participate.
No, you're very, very welcome. Okay, so we're just going to take a minute or two to, just focus and dedicate our practice. Yeah. So just again, settle into conducive position, nice and relaxed. The back straight. come into the body for a moment and just be present. So in this way, meditating together, listening to teachings being explained, reflecting on the meaning, discussing. All this is with the purpose to deepen the foundation of our Dharma practice, especially this motivation of compassion. So here we're sowing the seeds of enlightenment. And we should rejoice, be very happy that we've spent this time together in such a positive way. Generate the strong intention for these seeds to grow and flourish. Continue to water the seed so that it grows into a strong tree, that our practice can become of great benefit to ourselves and all other beings. And we're going to recite the application verses, just 2 verses coming in one moment. You can find it. Oh, goodness me. I'm afraid it's quite difficult to find. Oh, it's actually disappeared. 1 second. Oh, here we are. Okay. Right. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the screen share here. I'll be with you in 1 second. Here we are. Okay. Right. Now what's happened? Technical problems. I do apologize. I thought I knew how to do Zoom. Okay, can you see the prayers now, please? Anybody? Yes?
No.
We were seeing it before. I think now we can see your folder.
Okay, 1 second. Now I have it. Okay. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. A lot of complications. So here we go. So it's just these 3 verses here. This one first. May the precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen never decrease, but increase more and more. Just as the brave Manjushri and Samandabhadra have realized things as they are, I dedicate all virtue in the best way, so that I too may follow after them. And then if we can do this, the next one, I will chant it in Tibetan. So you can just listen or you can chant along with me if you like. And this is their long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Gangri rawe korwe chinkam de pendang de wa malu jungwe ne genre zi wang tenzin gyatso yi shape si te badu tengyo chi. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, Sanaz, if you, I'm going to be sending an email each week. So if you would like to receive the emails, if you just like to put your email address in the chat, then I will include you.
Thank you. Yes, of course. I'm also not very great with Zoom. I found it.
Good, okay.
Thank you.